You knew Jeffrey Epstein, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. We flew Bill Clinton.
Tucker that we got now is Epstein-Island Chris Tucker, not Smokey.
Smokey? They got Smokey in the motherfucking pictures too? No wonder this man gave his life to Christ. We ain't about to get Rush Hour 4 anymore. They about to rush his ass to prison. Let me stop because I don't know if he did anything, but fool. Katt Williams did.
Cube want to do another one because Cube, of course, it's like, he kind of created Fridays. And I was in the first one. Yeah. And Cube, after I did the first Fridays back then, I never thought about doing sequels. I always wanted to do a good job and keep moving to the next movie. So Cube asked me back in, I think it was 96 or 97. He said, Chris, we want to do another Fridays, man. And I was just like, nah, I don't want to do another Fridays. I want to do like Eddie Murphy and them did. I want to do Money Talks. I did Money Talks and then eventually did Rush Hour. I said, I don't want to do another. And he said, what? You sure? I was like, nah, I don't want to do another. So he couldn't believe it, but he kept moving, and he got Mike Epps, and they went and did another one, and it was great. He did two of them, and they were great.
Tucker not talked about being in next Friday because I know it was Mike Epps, but
we wanted him. He turned it down. Yeah, we wanted to pay him $12 million to do that movie.
What?
And he turned it down. He said it was for religious reasons. He didn't want to cuss, and he didn't want to smoke weed on camera.
You knew Jeffrey Epstein, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. We flew Bill Clinton and a lot of different. That was a humanitarian trip to Africa. Yeah. And I met him on that trip because it was his plane. I didn't know who plane we was getting on, but it was a whole bunch of dignitary people. We was with a delegation, and yeah, I met him, and you don't know people what they do in their private lives, so yeah.
But tell me this, Chris. You was on this private plane, and you could tell that it was a private plane because they called it, was it Lolita Express?
Oh, yeah, it was a private plane. Yes. Oh, yes.
But wait a minute. You didn't never go to that island, did you?
No. I don't know where that thing got.
The Chris Tucker that we got now is Epstein-Island Chris Tucker, not Smokey.
Oh, Lord.
Whew. If I didn't know no better, I'd tell you he's the greatest. I don't care what you say. To be confident and not delusional is a real skill. Most of these confident people we see is really delusional.
Well, you don't think they asked Chris Tucker to come back in the second Friday? Smokey was all in Smokey. There ain't no Friday without Smokey.
We all agree to that, and there's no next Friday without Friday, and there's no Friday after next without Friday.
We talk about the road because you said that they don't.
Here's the thing. Chris was allowed to make the decision. At the time that this is happening, Katt Williams is known for smoking weed. Willie Nelson is known for smoking weed. Right. Snoop's known for smoking weed. But none of us is really known except Willie. And I'm saying Chris Tucker didn't want to be the poster child for smoking weed. He don't smoke weed like that.
Right.
He in the church. He Michael Jackson's best friend. Christmas. Michael Jackson called him Christmas. You ever met a man that gave you a little nickname like that?
No.
Me neither.
For years, Chris Tucker's disappearance from Hollywood was wrapped in a neat, respectable bow. Faith, growth, and a man supposedly choosing God over the spotlight. But that story is starting to crack, and what's spilling out has people asking whether religion was a rebirth or a retreat. With Katt Williams suddenly sounding less like a hater and more like a whistleblower, and newly released Epstein-related documents dragging old names back into the spotlight, Chris Tucker is now facing questions he can't joke his way out of. From private jets to uncomfortable interviews, fans are revisiting everything they thought they knew, and realizing this saga might be far messier than anyone was prepared for. For the longest time, Chris Tucker was treated like one of Hollywood's untouchables, the kind of star whose legacy felt locked in, protected by nostalgia, box office records, and that unmistakable fast-talking charm that defined an entire era of comedy. At his peak, he wasn't just famous, he was bulletproof. This was the man who turned Smokey into a cultural icon, who headlined billion-dollar franchises, who could disappear for years and still be welcomed back with open arms. And yet, when Chris Tucker quietly stepped away from Hollywood, something about it never fully made sense. The explanation was always clean, almost too clean. He found God, he outgrew the industry, he wanted peace. Fans accepted it because they wanted to believe it. But now, years later, his name is suddenly resurfacing at the exact moment when old stories are being reopened, sealed files are being unsealed, and people are re-examining who really knew what and when. That timing is what has everyone side-eyeing the narrative. Because this isn't a random resurfacing or a one-off rumor. It's happening alongside newly released Epstein-related documents, viral clips being pulled back into circulation, and comments from people like Katt Williams that once sounded wild but now feel uncomfortably specific. Public sentiment is shifting fast because the internet has a long memory and zero patience for half answers. What once looked like a quiet spiritual retreat is now being questioned as a possible strategic disappearance. And the same fans who once applauded Chris for choosing faith over fame are now asking whether the full story was ever told at all. For years, Chris Tucker carefully curated a second act that couldn't have been more different from the loud, cussing, weed-clouded world that made him famous. This was the changed man era, soft-spoken interviews, church appearances, faith-forward explanations for why he no longer wanted certain roles. To many fans, it felt like growth, like maturity, like a man who had seen the dark side of Hollywood and chose the light instead. That's why the emotional whiplash is hitting so hard now. Because when resurfacing documents, old flight logs, and long-buried associations start circulating online, they crash directly into the image Tucker spent years building. Audiences don't just feel confused, they feel betrayed. A redemption arc only works if the past you're distancing yourself from is actually behind you. And that's why people are spiraling. The same man who spoke about values, restraint, and faith is now being mentioned in the same conversations as Epstein-related allegations. Not accused outright, but close enough to make people deeply uncomfortable. And in the court of public opinion, proximity alone is enough to unravel a carefully constructed persona. What's making this moment even more unsettling is the realization that someone tried to warn people, and nobody wanted to hear it. Katt Williams has always been easy to dismiss. Too loud, too blunt, too willing to say names out loud in an industry built on silence. When he made that now infamous Epstein Island Chris Tucker comment, most people laughed it off as jealousy, bitterness, or another Katt Williams rant that went too far. It was treated like comedy, not commentary. But now that clip has resurfaced, and suddenly it doesn't land the same way. It sounds less like a joke and more like a side-eye disguised as humor. That's the part that's making people uneasy, because Katt didn't frame it as gossip, and he didn't walk it back. He said it plainly, confidently, and kept it moving. At the time, the industry shrugged. Now, with new information trickling out, people are replaying that moment and asking the question nobody asked back then. What if he wasn't reaching? What if he was early? The cracks in Chris Tucker's story didn't start with Epstein-related conversations. They started years earlier with a decision that never quite sat right with fans. His refusal to return to Friday was framed as a moral stand. A man who no longer wanted to curse, smoke, or glorify behavior that conflicted with his faith. And people respected that explanation because it sounded reasonable on the surface. But Friday wasn't just another movie. It was a cultural staple, a role that defined him, and a franchise fans begged to see him return to. Walking away from that kind of legacy isn't something people do lightly. Still, the audience accepted it because the church explanation felt safe, clean, and unquestionable. Looking back now, though, that was the first real wait-a-minute moment. Because the more people revisit that decision, the more it feels less like a moral boundary and more like a carefully chosen exit, one that avoided scrutiny rather than inviting reflection. Here's where the story starts unraveling in real time. Chris Tucker didn't reject sequels altogether. He rejected that sequel. Right after turning down Friday, He leaned fully into Rush Hour, not just once but repeatedly. Multiple films, bigger paychecks, longer commitments. So if the issue was really about sequels, that argument falls apart. If it was about clean content, that explanation starts wobbling too. And when explanations wobble, suspicion fills the space. Fans didn't need anyone to spell it out. They started connecting the dots on their own. Why draw such a hard line with one franchise, but not another? Why disappear selectively? That contradiction is what shifted curiosity into doubt. Because when a narrative stops lining up, people stop listening to what you say and start paying attention to what you do. And right now, that inconsistency is pushing more people to re-examine everything they once accepted at face value. This is where the conversation shifts from speculation to documented proximity, and that distinction matters. What's confirmed is that Chris Tucker's name appears in Epstein-related flight logs from the early 2000s, specifically tied to a private jet Epstein owned. What's not confirmed is wrongdoing. Tucker's explanation has remained consistent. He says he was part of a humanitarian trip to Africa focused on AIDS awareness, traveling alongside high-profile figures like Bill Clinton, and that he didn't even know whose plane it was at the time. On paper, that defense sounds reasonable. But public skepticism kicks in the moment Epstein's broader history enters the frame. Because this wasn't just any private jet. It was that jet, the one now infamous for who used it and where it went. And while Tucker maintains he never visited the island and had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes, people aren't just reacting to what he says, they're reacting to the pattern. The same explanations have been offered by multiple public figures, and in a post-Epstein world, the audience no longer hears humanitarian trip without mentally adding an asterisk. What truly shifted the mood wasn't a document. It was Tucker himself. When asked directly about Epstein in an interview, his energy changed. The usually quick-witted, effortlessly funny Chris Tucker suddenly slowed down. He stumbled over words, repeated himself, laughed nervously, and tried to brush past the topic as quickly as possible. There were no dramatic outbursts, no angry denials, just visible discomfort. And sometimes, that's louder than any statement. Viewers picked up on the tension immediately. The pauses, the deflection, the way he leaned into technicalities instead of clarity. It wasn't about what he said as much as how he said it. In an era where audiences are hyper-aware of media training and PR language, that moment planted doubt. Not because it proved anything, but because it didn't reassure anyone either. Once those clips hit social media, the internet did what it always does. It started dissecting everything. Comment sections turned into courtrooms, and every laugh, pause, and word choice became evidence in the court of public opinion. Some people defended Tucker fiercely, reminding others that being on a plane doesn't equal guilt. Others weren't buying it at all, pointing out that innocent people tend to respond with anger, not awkward humor. What's clear is that the humanitarian narrative no longer gets automatic acceptance. Audiences have been burned too many times by stories that later unraveled. And when trust is already fragile, even neutral explanations feel rehearsed. The skepticism isn't just about Tucker. It's about a collective refusal to blindly accept sanitized celebrity explanations anymore. What keeps this story alive and growing is the fact that it isn't over. Epstein-related documents are still being released in waves, and each drop brings renewed attention to names people thought were safely in the past. Even without new information directly tied to Tucker, the uncertainty alone keeps the pressure on. Silence gets louder. Clarifications get picked apart. And every day, without closure, fuels more speculation. This isn't a one-cycle scandal. It's a slow burn, and the audience knows it. That looming "what else is coming" is what keeps people watching, waiting, and rechecking timelines. So now the question isn't about proving guilt or innocence. It's about interpretation. Was Chris Tucker's retreat from Hollywood a sincere act of faith, or a carefully timed step back from an industry he knew was about to turn on itself? Is this just an unfortunate coincidence made worse by proximity, or a pattern people were too distracted to notice before? And when a redemption story collides with unresolved questions, Which version of the truth do you believe? That's the debate playing out right now. And it's one the audience, not Hollywood, gets to decide.